Fugue and Riffs. Bob's Burgers is entered by a KGB hit squad trying to take out the restaurant's owner as they believe he is a man named Archer. Which he is, as the rest of ISIS has been trying to figure out where he's been after running away. They then track him to a spa, where the agents plan a fake attack on his life in order to ease him back into the swing of things, as Krieger warns that remembering too many details of his previous life at once might cause brain damage. But this fake rescue is interrupted by a real attack by more KGB agents, so Archer and Lana take cover and attempt to fight their way out, something they only manage to do when Lana hits Archer with a frying pan, and he gets all his old memories back. These memories include the reason and circumstances behind him running away. He fled his mother's wedding to a Cadillac dealer named Ron, only to adopt the Bob identity shortly afterwards. They then try to question how Archer was tracked so easily by the KGB when they couldn't find him, revealed to be Barry spying on him from space. With the beginning of the fourth season also came a reintroduction to the series, as well as a tongue-in-cheek reference to one of actor H. John Benjamin's other roles on the network. I've briefly talked about Bob's Burgers before, so I won't reiterate my thoughts here, but this episode gets some comedic mileage out of just how different the two characters are, in spite of the similarities to their voice. Hearing Archer/Bob calling his family idiots instead of just mumbling, "Oh my god," points out how different they are, not to mention the idea of Bob taking a personal day from stress without someone else going along. The rest of this episode deals with the ISIS agents trying to snap Archer out of his funk by slowly reintroducing him to his old life. Not too quickly, otherwise Archer's mind-brain would whatever, but also not too quickly so it doesn't come across as exposition to the watching audience, especially first-time viewers, while also ensuring that things aren't too slow. At the end of the episode, the rest of Archer's memories come back in an instant. That is to say, as soon as the writers believe that the whole memory lost shtick was no longer interesting to the audience. It also subverts expectations a bit. As with last season's intro, Archer also ran away from a traumatic event of losing Katya. So here we are to assume that he's processing Katya's loss a second time, only to instead reveal that the fugue state actually began from an off-screen wedding. The wind cries merry. Mallory announces that on top of doing peer reviews, a former ISIS trainee who joined with Odin after his training was completed named Lucas Troy has gone rogue during a mission, stealing a bunch of uranium and bearer bonds, then died in a plane crash. But Archer refuses to believe that he's really dead, and eventually runs off to track the guy after getting a phone call from him. Lana and Cyril chase after him, with Cyril trying to do his peer review in spite of the ongoing mission, only to arrive at a mansion in the woods of Vermont that Archer's inside of, one that Troy is trying to convert into a bed and breakfast after faking his own death to get away of the world of super spies. But first he drugs Archer's wine and chases down the other agents, with Lana running out of ammo and fleeing on foot before ultimately using Cyril as bait to knock a tree onto Troy while he's distracted. Archer catches up in time to find a dying Troy who makes a deathbed confession that his single target attraction to Archer resulted in him violating the guy after a training mission while he was unconscious. As frequently as Archer has physical relationships with the woman he encounters, what he's not great with are non-physical relationships, being emotionally stunted as a result of his upbringing, resulting in a failure to truly connect with another person. This is to say that Archer has no friends because he doesn't understand friendship as a concept. But he does seemingly have at least one, and that was Lucas Troy. Lucas Troy, however, never saw Archer as a friend, but instead used him as an outlet of sort for his own refusal to acknowledge his feelings. Their time together is best defined by hyper-masculine repression of latent homosexual desires, the two being bros to dismiss the two being anything else. Because Archer does not understand friendship, it means he has a poor capability of understanding relationships of any other kind. This means that he is easy to take advantage of by any person who shows a surface-level amount of kindness to him. He can't really detect when someone has an ulterior motive, so Lucas Troy invites him out to the middle of nowhere with the assumption that he'll throw his old life away to run a B&B with him, faking his death and running away with a bunch of cash and weapons. The reason he thinks this is because he's managed to take Archer's trust of him for granted before, trust that has clearly not been earned. Legs. After a series of difficulties involving his inability to use his legs, capped off by the fact that he's told he can't go on a mission to Rome, Ray is approached by Krieger, who offers to give him the use of his legs back through bionic surgery. He sort of agrees, and Pam is called in to assist with the operation. But Archer, who's in the middle of trying to negotiate for a rocket launcher with ISIS's new armorer, finds out about this surgery and, fearing a robot uprising, plans to break into Krieger's lab with it so he can stop the surgery. Lana and Cyril rush to stop him, warning Mallory about what's going on, though Ron tells her not to worry, and to trust her employees to clean up their own messes as they leave for a cruise. After wrecking one of the rooms with his rocket launcher, Archer decides to break in through the air ducts, so Lana has the maintenance guy turn up the heat to flush him out, and Archer passes out. In the end, the surgery is a success and Ray can walk again, just in time for Archer to fall out of the ceiling. As Ron repeatedly tries to tell Mallory throughout the episode, she needs to stop micromanaging her employees so often. She disagrees with him, as her micromanagement often seems to be the one thing keeping the office intact, as proven by the end of the episode when they destroy the furnace, parts of the ceiling, and several rooms with a rocket launcher because she wasn't there to prevent them from doing something stupid. But the agents of ISIS have destroyed plenty of property before, in spite of Mallory's intervention, so it's not as though her efforts accomplish much anyway. What they do accomplish is making people more dependent on her. When Archer can't requisition the rocket launcher he wants, he turns to Mallory. When Lana and Cyril suspect something is up, they turn to Mallory. And Ray complains to Mallory when he loses a position rather than going to the head of HR for the discrimination. Because Mallory always has to be the first one on the scene in every incident and insists on constantly being in the know, her punishment is constantly being in the know, especially in situations where she probably didn't want to know what was going on. So at Ron's behest, she spends the weekend on a cruise ship relaxing rather than spending it stressing out over the surgery Ray went through, the explosions going off in the hallway, or Brett's blood pooling on the stairwell. The punishment for micromanagement is that you always have to micromanage in the future. Midnight Ron. Archer is trying to contact somebody from ISIS to get him out of Montreal after he gets stranded there with no money or passport. But no one is interested in assisting the guy, as they can't think of a single time he's done a favor for them, and Mallory is more concerned with getting to the opera with Ron later that evening, despite him being out of town for work. But overhearing the conversation, Ron himself decides to pick up Archer with the justification that he wants to bond with his stepson a bit. But after sneaking through the border with Archer in the trunk, he's accosted by a hit squad who try to run him off the road. Archer stops with a few shots. Their car is wrecked and Archer learns from Ron why that happened. He used to steal cars and eventually ran a chop shop of his own before the rest of his gang was arrested. So he gives him a briefcase full of cash every few months for not ratting him out. Archer and Ron try to hitch a ride home, only to get kidnapped by a trucker before making a run for it by hopping on a train. After riding the train to a city with one of Ron's dealerships, they then ride to the opera together, with Archer deciding to get along with Ron in front of Mallory just to annoy her. Mallory mentions that she believes Ron to be a very boring man, implied to be part of the reason she's married to him in the first place. That and the fact that Ron Liebman, his voice actor, was married to Jessica Walter in real life. After spending so many years of her life as an agent living a life of danger and intrigue, the one thing she wants to do is now the opposite of that. And while she doesn't have the luxury of simply stepping away from ISIS after investing so much of her life into her career, she does at least have the luxury of choosing who to marry, and then choosing someone who can give her a break from all that. And Ron manages to do just that, not only in the immediate term by being the guy who will take her to the opera, but he's also able to directly address the reason Mallory can't leave, her son. Archer is dependent on Mallory to such an extent that she can't simply leave her son alone. He's one of the reasons she is stuck in her old life. So he points out how much his codependency is holding back both of them, that Archer can't leave a country without asking for an extraction, and that he possibly only got himself into a bad situation in the first place because he knew he had his mother to bail him out. And ironically, it's the fact that Ron himself was once a member of the criminal underworld but managed to leave that makes him uniquely situated to recognize his own former failings in the Archer family. Viscous Coupling. Archer is trying to get a date among the people of Isis only to realize that he's the only person without one, as even Lana and Cyril are back together. But when he's trying to convince Lana to come back to him, he gets a call from Katya, asking for help getting Barry back from space. After using Cheryl to trap Mallory and Lana in a vault, as well as knocking Ray and Cyril unconscious, Archer makes a plan to assist Barry in returning by convincing Krieger to build the rocket, assured that Ray's cybernetic legs can defend against the guy, as well as the fact that Katya will leave him once he talks to the guy again. He even makes a fake tape of Barry confessing to cheating on Katya with all of the female scientists aboard the station to drive her away. But after Katya reacts poorly to this tape, he tries to go back to Krieger only to realize he was too convincing before, and that the rocket is actually functional. Barry returns to Earth, calls Katya, and reveals that not only was her crying to Archer fake, but that she is now head of the KGB. Archer finds out that Katya is emotionally vulnerable due to the fact that Barry is trapped in space while believing that he's actually just uninterested in her. This by the end is revealed to be an intentional ploy to trick Archer into providing a way for Barry to return to Earth, one that is dependent on Archer being too self-centered to understand that his worldview may not be entirely accurate. Because he himself views every woman as being obsessed with him, he thinks it's not a stretch that Katya will dump Barry for him. And because he thinks Barry is a bad guy, he thinks it's not a stretch that Barry will easily prove that. But the plan has flaws, such as the fact that Barry has never made an attempt to contact Katya but is still capable of direct communication with Isis later. Or the fact that his poor attempt at splicing sentences together to make him sound bad was immediately believed by a woman who's effectively a supercomputer. And while Archer made some attempts to outmaneuver the other two by giving Krieger fake instructions, he didn't think through his plan well enough due to assuming that the way he wanted things to go was the same way that others were already leaning. An Archer-centric worldview is, to Archer, the default. It's only a matter of making other people see it that way. Once Bitten. Archer, Ray, and Cyril are stranded in the deserts of Turkmenistan with their tires buried as Archer refuses to help them dig. He then wanders into the bushes to defecate, only to be bit by a snake. Ray then throws out his back trying to lift the jeep, leaving only Cyril able to drive them to safety, though he hits a camel in the desert and the three men are captured. After a few failed attempts at communication, he finally manages to tell the men who captured him that Archer's dying of snake venom, and then they buy an anti-venom from the men, waking Archer up just before his dream is over. Archer's dream/hallucination is of him being led through various moments of his life, including getting shot by a deranged stalker before taking a lacrosse scholarship, and receiving an alligator toy for his 6th birthday from his real father, whose identity he can't remember. Back at Isis, Lana is complaining about the mission to destroy an oil pipeline and tries to lodge a formal complaint, though Cheryl points out that she'll never actually stand for her ideals because it would put her career ambitions in jeopardy. Cheryl explains to Lana in this episode that the real reason she's never actually done anything to act on her convictions is because she wants to run Isis one day to justify all the other times she's never acted on her convictions. This idea that she's done a few horrible things in the past in the interest of fighting under the ISIS name, and that to live with the various things she's done and the innocents that she's killed and the various countries she's assisted in exploiting, are all done under some greater humanitarian goal. If she can simply keep her head down and work her way up, she'll eventually be the one in charge, and then she can fix the broken system from the inside. But staying inside a broken system for so long in the first place is the very reason why she has so much to justify. That if she had walked away in the first place, she could have done so guilt-free. This is a similar conclusion to what Cyril and Ray make while they're negotiating for Archer's life in the desert. Their mission was to delay construction, that is, to destroy an oil pipeline, to prevent the fuel from getting into the wrong hands. And sure, doing this means that oil won't get used by a nation intent on using it for ill purposes and could be construed as a short-term downside to a long-term mission of humanitarian aid, preventing a war before it starts by sabotaging the instigator's fuel supply. But in the short term, it's not about that. It's about destabilizing whoever the highest bidder wants destabilized, as any good that could have come from their efforts is so far in the future as to be a moot point. Live and Let Dine. An Albanian diplomat is dining at Casto's, a high-end restaurant that's also the center of a reality TV show named Bastard Chef, and that due to a threat made against the ambassador, ISIS is given the task of blending in as the restaurant's team to do security, in the hopes that Mallory will get a few contracts. Mallory is also trying to get Cheryl to get her a reservation, something she only does by using ISIS equipment to scan for the real phone number and then pretending to be a Kennedy. Back at the restaurant, Archer begins to take after Casto by belittling the rest of the staff, who are his co-workers, as he starts to wonder if perhaps he should have been a chef instead of an agent. Despite the obstacles caused by none of the ISIS agents having any experience, the meal is eventually served and the Albanian ambassador dies of apparent poisoning, with the culprit revealing himself as Casto. He took an offer from the KGB to poison the guy to make ISIS look bad. As usual, the antics of ISIS are far more determined by the personalities of the members than by the actual security needs of whoever it is they're working for. This is not the first time Mallory has called in a fake threat in order to secure some sort of luxury under the guise of protector at work, nor, strangely, is it the first time that the team has fallen for her ruse. This is partially why Archer is as effective an agent as he needs to be. He doesn't take things seriously enough to really fall for any of the schemes the people around him do. Sure, he's easily manipulated, but at best this results in him blending in well with whatever his cover story's supposed to be, and at worst, it means that he has to play into his other specialty of an old-fashioned shootout. Of course, the strategy of barely eking by so consistently still has the obvious drawbacks. For one, the fact that ISIS rarely ends up with anything especially lucrative because of this habit. It's sort of a Gilligan's Island situation, where if Archer and Lana ever actually succeed at one of the many plans that Mallory comes up with to get rich, then the show fundamentally changes. Of course, considering that this is the second time we've seen a scheme of this sort in the show, perhaps there is some motivation to actually see them complete a mission in this vein, if only to shake things up before the show becomes far too repetitive. Coyote Lovely. The episode begins with Mallory interviewing Lana and Cyril about the whereabouts of Archer, flashing back to an operation to stop a truck full of illegal immigrants at the southern border while catching Moreno, a notorious coyote. But when Archer finds her, he quickly becomes attracted to the woman, disabling his fellow agents to spend time with her instead, and even assisting in bringing the immigrants she's smuggling further into the country. But he gets into a shootout with Border Patrol and, despite taking them in as captives, still needs medical attention, which he gets from a veterinarian. But Archer's condition worsens and he eventually needs to call a medical evacuation for himself and the agents, who find out that he's a secret agent, while Archer discovers the woman he spent the day with was not Moreno but her daughter. And the entire operation was something orchestrated by Mallory as a distraction for the real coyote, something Lana and Cyril start to suspect when she orders them to do nothing about Archer's disappearance. The spy movie cliché of the attractive enemy agent who is wooed by the protagonist before going over to his side is something directly called upon in this episode, though not played out in that exact way as is typical for the show. Archer spends the episode assuming this is how things will work out, that he'll end up wooing Moreno after selflessly volunteering to fight alongside her and the immigrants that she's escorting, and then the two will live happily ever after, or whatever. Of course, this isn't even close to what happened. Not only is Archer the one to go to her side, but she's not even the right operative in the situation, as Mallory arranged for her crew to get held up by the wrong person after all. When Archer's mistakes are so consistently made that they can actually be relied on, they loop around to being an asset once again. And better yet for the spy game, an asset that can be used with probable deniability. If something is done as a clear mistake, nobody would question that it was done on purpose. Archer messes up the mission, or at least that's what any observer would deduce from seeing him in action. So when his messed up actions wind up contributing to the actual goal, then people like Mallory, a few steps removed from the action, can get away with organizing the entire thing. Because who would plan around Archer's chaos, and who could plan around Archer's chaos? The Honeymooners. Archer and Lana go undercover as newlyweds in order to do surveillance on a group of North Koreans buying nuclear material. But Cyril is nervous about Lana and Archer being left alone in the honeymoon suite, and, at Pam and Cheryl's prodding, he spies on them from across the building. Meanwhile, Lana is upset with Archer for not taking the task seriously as usual, as he's far more concerned with the fact that his bonus is smaller than normal that year, something Mallory arranged after finding out that he's been using her credit card. For complaining about this to his mother, Mallory names Lana in charge of the mission, so Archer decides to take matters into his own hands and attack the Koreans directly. They get captured as Archer is rampaging and need to break out, cornered in the bathroom until Cyril runs in to save the day with a fire extinguisher, only for Lana to instead question why Cyril was so mistrusting in the first place. In the end, Lana mentions a decision that she's made as the seller of the nuclear material, Krieger, has his radioactive pig eat the bodies. Lana in the early seasons dated Cyril explicitly due to the fact that he was the anti-Archer, so unlike the guy that her tactic of getting revenge on her ex would be all the more obvious, while avoiding the obvious pitfalls of her previous relationship in the process. These previous pitfalls include Archer's utter selfishness, the fact that he rarely thinks of anybody but himself and, as a result, is a terrible partner. But Cyril is just as selfish as Archer. He only expresses it in a different way, by letting his insecurities get the better of him and assuming that Lana is guilty of the things he himself considers doing. Cyril was never faithful to her, and yet he's extraordinarily clingy for a guy who struggles with infidelity. It isn't as though Lana herself isn't selfish, though, nor is selfishness necessarily a bad thing if it's done in moderation. Self-care is selfish, as is putting your wants before another person's, and not doing either of these things will make your life much worse as others begin to push you around in recognition of the fact that you won't stand up for yourself in retaliation. While going too far in the interest of self-care can be selfish and thus bad, it's a lot easier to consider these actions as justified so long as you're not the worst person about it in your life. So Lana can act selfishly, but she compares herself to Archer, Cyril, and even Mallory, and almost anyone else looks good compared to them. Chien Tangerine. Archer and Lana are in Morocco to extract an agent named Kazak, but Archer is increasingly getting on Lana's nerves, keeping her up through most of the night and getting them into trouble because he wants to say catchphrases. Eventually they find Kazak, who happens to be a very large and very gassy dog, and Lana is upset with having to share a small car with them. This is made worse by the fact that there's a blockade preventing them from their extraction point, and they need to go to the desert for the backup. After Kazak vomits one too many times, Lana quits and storms off into the desert. Archer eventually does come back for her, but only after she's been captured due to leaving without water, or a radio, or a weapon. He's able to, with Kazak's help, disable the men who got her, and there he learns that they weren't actually after the dog, but a microfilm in his collar. Back at ISIS, Mallory is being pestered by Pam, who recently passed the ISIS field agent battery and wants to be sent on missions herself. Lana doesn't need to put up with Archer, and yet she does. Lana doesn't need to put up with Mallory, and yet she does. And Lana doesn't need to put up with ISIS, and yet she does. With her skill set and capabilities and connections, she could have walked away from the life she's living years ago and been much better off for it. Plenty of other agencies are hiring, and it's not like job hopping is unheard of. Even job hopping to something outside of intelligence. But for whatever reason, Lana sticks around with all the people who annoy her and seem to make her days miserable. And while part of this can be considered sunk cost, she's put too much time into ISIS to up and leave. Another part is the fact that she's effectively grown used to it by now. Lana acknowledges that half of her job now is just babysitting Archer, and that he's just a nepotism hire who would have been excommunicated from any other agency. The entire situation is one huge mess, but it's a messy pile that she's climbed her way up from the bottom of. She's seen so many flaws and holes in the system through her journey up that she feels as though fixing everything is not only within her abilities, but within her knowledge as well. So it's only a matter of waiting out the clock before she gets the role within the organization that she feels as though she's earned, as if this would then justify all the wasted years and miserable missions. The Papal Chase. Mallory hears of a threat to the Pope's life and sends the pairing of Archer and Pam to protect him, also sending Lana because she actually speaks Italian, and Woodhouse as he is the spitting image of the Pope. They fly down there, cramming a bit of language learning in on the plane before getting to the Vatican and swapping the Pope out with the decoy. But Archer, believing that the Swiss guard still uses halberds, did not bring any weapons, forcing them to flee by car. They're chased down by members of the Swiss guard, only for the Pope to point out that they have no way of knowing that they are for sure actual members of the guard, proven when Archer blows up their vehicle with a road flare before they crash and the police reveal they're members of the mob, hired by a leading cardinal to assassinate the Pope to be the frontrunner in the next election. They then deduced that the cardinal hired ISIS to protect the Pope, as he assumed they would fail, and the attempt would at least make it look like he was trying to prevent it. This episode makes a brief reference to Lucy, the Daughter of the Devil, by Archer, a short allusion to the actor's previous role. What this episode also references is the show Archer, not solely in the sense that there are frequent callbacks to earlier lines of dialogue and character beats, but in the sense that earlier plot points are recycled full-fold. Once again, ISIS is given a job with the express understanding that their team of highly trained field agents will mess it up. The Gilligan's Isleification of the show is in full swing by now, and the rest of what we see by the cast is as unnecessary as it is gratuitous. Pam is now an agent for no reason other than the fact that it gives more of an excuse to keep her involved with the rest of their main cast, now that their grievances with one another are less subtle and more overt, things no longer kept within the confines of a counselor's office. Cheryl's involvement in the plot is her repeatedly wondering if Mallory is a vampire due to taking one of her many sarcastic comments totally literally. It's hard to imagine these characters as their Season 1 selves, and this is normally the type of thing to be called out as Flanderization, if these were exaggerated traits of theirs that were present from the beginning. Instead, they've been given new personalities that serve to keep the repetitive tone of the series more interesting, because something has to do that. See Tunt Part 1. A bomber crashes in the Bermuda Triangle, losing its payload of a hydrogen bomb in the process. As the US doesn't have a nearby deep-sea salvage vessel, Mallory gets the idea to contact Cheryl's rich brother Cecil to borrow his equipment to recover it, and then ransom the bomb back to the US government. The crew of ISIS aboards the Tunt's private helicopter, and they head to the last known location of the bomb, with Archer trying to come up with new drinks, Pam having an allergic reaction to soy, and Cecil interviewing the crew about his sister's behavior. This results in Cheryl sneaking aboard the helicopter, listening in on these conversations before deducing that they're being recorded and trying to crash the helicopter by attacking the pilot Tiffy, Cecil's girlfriend. As they're locked inside the cockpit fighting, Pam goes into anaphylactic shock and needs an EpiPen located in the first aid kit in there, and Cecil reveals the truth. There was never a hydrogen bomb, and he simply wanted to get his sister's co-workers together to record evidence that she was insane, so that he can get conservatorship and her half of the inheritance, as his philanthropic dealings have bankrupted him. After this reveal, there's still the question of why they had to be aboard a helicopter for this instead of talking it out in a lawyer's office, and he introduces Captain Murphy, yes, that Captain Murphy, who plans on firing nerve gas at the US if his demands for the world to stop polluting the oceans are not met. Cecil and Tiffy are played by Eugene Merman and Kristen Schaal, respectively, which, if you don't memorize voice actor names, play Jean and Louise of Bob's Burgers alongside H. John Benjamin, who, in Archer, plays Archer. And while Captain Murphy isn't played by Harry Gause, there's still a reference to his original voice actor in its death scene next episode, which, spoilers, the good guys win and the bad guys lose. Well, at least the protagonists win. C-Lab 2021 is also another Adam Reed show referenced in this episode directly, and all of this piles up into an amalgamation of references upon references that result in an episode that derives most of its appeal from the fact of so many "hey, I know that guy" moments. See Tunt Part 2. The ISIS agents infiltrate the C-Lab under the guise of being a camera crew sent to interview Captain Murphy about his demands. Archer calls the role of skipper aboard their submersible, with his piloting breaking Ray's nose and giving Lana seasickness that she refuses to drink to calm down. Eventually they arrive, with Murphy refusing to elaborate on his missile stash as he tries to control the interview. But before he can finish reading off his demands, Lana calls him out for bluffing about the missiles in the first place before Archer's gun misfires and collapses the C-Lab. Murphy is killed in the escape, but not before pointing out that there are only 3 wetsuits available. He suggests that one person voluntarily drowned themselves to be resuscitated later, and they choose the worst swimmer, Lana, only for Lana to then admit she cannot drown because she's pregnant, and Cyril is not the father. So Archer gives her the last rebreather and drowns himself, only to be revived later with no permanent brain damage as the defibrillator shocks Ray's legs again, and Cecil reveals that he's once more rich due to the insurance payout on his C-Lab. The first half of this episode was an inundation of a bunch of pop culture references that created half of the appeal. The other half of the episode comes not from the action and set pieces that normally make up the appeal of a spy thriller, but from character callbacks like Ray being paralyzed again, and Lana revealing she's pregnant while Cyril is not the father. And while this sounds normal for the show, after all, the appeal was not supposed to be action and adventure, but the comedy from the office setting, that office setting is all but gone for anything other than the initial scenes to set up certain episodes. Archer as a show continuously falls into the trappings of the spy genre it's parodying and moving further and further away from its initial premise, all while the appeal remains the same as we laugh along with the mundane aspects of the characters' lives. Archer has somehow managed to fall into the common trap of spectacle creep while still maintaining a lot of what it made it great in the first place. Normally, a show that keeps ramping up stakes and introducing new wacky personality traits for its cast could be considered in its death throes, trying to latch on to some sort of small relevance before the audience loses interest. But because Archer is still about what it's always been about, it avoids this while still maintaining so many of the symptoms of a show that's out of ideas. While it sounds like this loops around to not mattering, the reason I bring all of this up is because of the effect it will eventually have on the showrunners' decisions in the following seasons, to shake things up.